Prompting it's easy. It's something you can get going with quickly, and you can prove potentially that there is a use for the thing you're building. So taking a big off-the-shelf model for a POC, doing some prompting is just a quick and dirty way to get something working. And I think you can prove the whole flow end to end. The fine-tuning is actually a wide variety of techniques. It's not one thing. So supervised fine-tuning is you have a bunch of labeled samples, input-output pairs, potentially, that you want to use. RLHF is more involved. You're actually producing outputs, having humans label them, feeding that back, and doing this kind of over and over again. That's like in the loop. Then there's continued pre-training, which we typically find useful for domain adaptation. So these are, again, three broad categories. Then you have things like QORA, these low-rank methods, which change only small parts of the neural network. Typically, you use that when you have a serving infrastructure that you want to build small customizations per user. So again, all of these have a place, and they all do different things. So that's the fine-tuning bucket. Then the pre-training bucket, you can think of as continued pre-training, what I just mentioned about adaptation, starting from a random checkpoint. But we actually don't think of it as that different anymore. They're really the same thing, just the initialization point's different. Pre-training from scratch, I'll talk about that one, then I'll walk my way back. Pre-training from scratch is useful when you want full control of the data. You know every data point that went in, you know where it came from. So I think that's key. When we provide a open source model from us or from Llama 3 or Mistral, whomever, you're relying on that entity to have done the work of properly permissioning the data and all of that. So if you want absolute certainty, you need to build it yourself. And we provide that capability. Some regulated industries really do love this. Potentially, you can also modify the behavior in very profound ways because you won't have certain kinds of data in there. You can fully control it. Once something has been trained with some data, you cannot ever remove that data or its effect on the model. So that's pre-training. All the various versions of fine-tuning, like I mentioned, continued pre-training is, let's say I have a general model and I have some really domain-specific data that has some jargon in it or whatever, then if I have enough of that data, a few million tokens, now I can start to make the model become an expert. One more thing with pre-training is I can actually make the model smaller. I can make a very tiny model that understands that domain really well and is very fast and cheap. This is actually one of our customers, Replit. They did exactly this. They don't need something that can chat about random topics in history. They wanted this to be a really good coding tool. And they had great data for that. So they built a smaller model to do that. That's really fast. And then with continued pre-training, domain adaptation, all of that happens, but you're at the mercy of the model size that was chosen up front. So you have to use, Llama 8B or DBRX, which is 132 billion parameters. So there's some trade-offs there. And a lot of those trade-offs come down to what scale of deployment you're at. As you move up the scale, you want to optimize more. You want to put in more time to make things work specifically for the things you care about and not care about the things you don't care about. And that translates into speed and cost. When you drop the model size by a factor of 2, you get, 1/4 the compute or something like that. So I think these are the kinds of trade-offs you need to be thinking about. So if you start off with a GPT-4 with prompting, and then you say, okay, I proved it out on my POC, and now I want to scale to 10 million users, you're going to be in for a little bit of a surprise when you look at the bill. It likely won't make any sense from a gross margin standpoint. That's what we find over and over again. These things, those solutions just don't scale to many users. That's not always true. It can be true in scenarios where the number of users is high, the customization is high. Like, prompting just doesn't give you that anymore. It's a great way to get started. And so now what we're providing is basically the bevy of tools to allow you to bake in the trade-offs you need to. And that's not up to us, that's up to our customers. We can advise on when we believe that makes sense, depending on how much data they have, how much scale they're going to have on inference. We can start to advise them on a path. Okay, so generality, I don't know really how to characterize that. So you can make a smaller model with general data sets and you'll have generality. But if you start off with more domain specificity like Replit did, you can make that model more general by continued pre-training if you want to. I would argue, though, that is outside the scope of what that model was intended to do. So if you want to build a general model, go build a general model. If you want to build a specific model, build a specific model. And I think the other part of this is that these models are not artifacts that live for years. It's not like, hey, I go and design a car and I'm going to keep that car around for 10 years. Models have a time to live that's like 6 months. So it's probably worthwhile to think, oh, now I've shifted the way I'm thinking about how my model's using. Let's build a new model to go do that. There are lots of ways to leverage the training that's gone into a model. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. I'll give you an example. If I train a 1 billion parameter model on 100 billion tokens, that's relatively cheap. That's something that's, I don't know, a couple $1,000, let's call it. I'm just off the top of my head. It's on that order. And let's say that data it's trained on is very specific. Now, if I want to go add general capabilities to it, it's probably not worth trying to push that and modify it into a place where it's more general. And if I'm blowing it up to 5 billion parameters, I basically saved maybe $1,000, maybe. And you added a lot of complexity to the situation. So in that case, I would advise a customer, hey, just start from scratch. It makes a lot more sense. If I have something I needed to have sort of general chat capabilities, but now I really want it to be able to understand tax code really well. That's where I'm like, okay, maybe start with something general, and now let's hone it into a tax LLM. That is worthwhile because the tax code stuff that I'm going to be training it on doesn't have the ability to make it chat in English, right? So I need to have both capabilities. So there are trade-offs here. There are also ways to like what we call upcycle models. If I have a model that's really good, I can potentially make it into an MOE. MOE is a mixture of experts, so I can blow it up into a much bigger model and then continue to train it. So these are all techniques that we do support actually, but we don't yet have a clear opinion on when that works well, when it doesn't work well. The application space is still so big and so undefined that we can't come in and say this is definitively the best way to do it. So right now we're in the space of we provide optionality, we provide some guidance, but our customers might go and try stuff. And it's like, hey, that looks really good. Okay, taught us something,
So you mentioned Replit. I believe Replit trained their own model from scratch, right? Is the type of data that a company has collected, is that indicative of whether it makes sense for them to train a model from scratch or to maybe take a more general model and then make it more specific? Because in the case of Replit, I'm assuming they had a bit of high quality data when it came to question and answering. Was that why it made sense for them to go down that direction?
Correct, yeah, and they had enough of it. I think the way we've looked at it now when we zoom out is companies have data and they want to have customized capabilities and models. So connecting from that data to the customized model has a whole bunch of different trade-offs. So if you have 100 billion or 200 billion tokens, yeah, pre-training might actually make sense for you. Or starting from a checkpoint of some generality and then adding in your data. There are lots of different techniques like this. We can start with general data and then move to specific data, even within pre-training. We call that curriculum learning. So that actually might make sense for a pre-training flow. If you have 50 million tokens, then you're probably not in the data regime of pre-training. You can do all kinds of things with fine-tuning, continued pre-training. If that data is actually highly labeled, meaning we know this is the kind of behavior I want to see, which we see in call centers all the time. It's like, here's an input query and here's a set of outputs that are good. Great, so now you have a wonderful labeled data set. Let's go do supervised fine-tuning. That makes a lot of sense. And then we can help them on what size model to start from. But you don't want to necessarily go with the biggest one if you don't care about all the generality or reasoning capabilities. So yeah, we see this kind of trade-off space happen a lot. It depends on the data size that the customer has. If they have 100 samples, then you're clearly just in this like instruction fine-tuning kind of regime. And maybe you're just in the prompting regime. That could also be true. So things like DSPy actually allow us to do that. So we can think of it as like, here's a set of evaluation criteria that I'm going to establish. Here's data I have, and then here's a whole set of techniques, prompting, tuning, training. How do I best accomplish the goal of hitting a mark on my evaluation that I can leverage all these tools? So I can sweep over prompting, tuning, and training. Now, why would a customer want to jump on now? You got to jump on at some point. There's going to be a continuous flow of these things. It's one of these things that it's best to understand how the process works rather than waiting for some perfect thing out there that's gonna make your life great. That's not going to happen. You're going to need to customize. You're going to need to build systems. You're going to need to do vector database stuff. You're going to need to do embedding models. All of this is going to be true. If you want to get going, this is what I tell customers all the time, you're going to have to jump in and start to understand how these things work. When I turn this knob, how does that affect performance for my domain? And when you get started, you build something that crosses a threshold of usefulness. Okay, now you have something you can go and put in front of either internal users or customers, and then you're going to learn from that. In the Databricks platform, we actually have a whole harness around that feedback. When people go and use these models, we can log all the responses. We can log feedback. It was a good response, a bad response, a bad response, what's a better response? This allows you to continually improve the model, and that's what we mean by this is a continuous loop. Once you get on train, you can make trade-offs. You can say, you know what, I'm going to need a bigger model to get the reasoning capabilities I need. Okay, go do that. Or, you know what, I didn't need that. I'm just wasting money on every inference. Let's go see if we can make something smaller that hits the same performance. So you learn as you build.